Sir, please come join me. Come here, I heard her say. It was easy to stand then, and I did so at her command. I felt lighter as I limped across the gold-threaded carpets and past the ancient Turkish and Roman vases. Perhaps it was the blood that absconded from my head, or the stress settled in my feet to escape yet another bear, that dark fiend above my head. It could not escape the parlour, I knew, blocked by another long crack of paint, like the fissures of hell. As I skirted behind the curtain of mid-afternoon light, a draught of cool breath bathed my wound, soothing its ache and crackling sting. When I saw her eyes in the atelier, I connected that angel's breath to the lady. Only her lips did not draw back, and the frill above her gown did not flutter as it did. Her brow pressed flat, its edges lined in shaded ochre. I realized it was not the Lady Boudreau from before, but her portrait. The floor was slate with clean cobblestone, furnished only with an ornamental wooden bench along the wall, lying next to the room's only focal point, a hinged, arched window. I stepped closer to her form, more lifelike than her person even. Had I heard her speak? I must have been out of my mind. Still, I could not detach myself from her subtle stare and sly grin. Clutched in her hand was the glassy stem of a lone peony, its cream and strawberry-filled petals feathering the breadth of a pinky from her nose. And she did not look at it. Those eyes fell only upon me.
"Good day, sir."
It was not the lady. The voice came from behind me, a brawny tone. One any could discern fell beneath the weary moustache of its wielder, muffled. The man was thin, his limbs appearing stretched as if on a table. His military at-ease glare was unblinking. As he entered the room, he slicked back his strawberry-blonde locks, a few grey strands diluting the surrounding vibrancy of the distinguished royal red suit and pants. And as I had guessed, a deep brown moustache overran his lip. What I couldn't have guessed, though, were his unkempt bare feet. Whereas the pocket square of his suit had not a stray speck of dust, the oddly exposed knuckles of his forefeet were a complete and muddy contrast. He tapped the stone tiles with his toenails as he stepped forth, folding his slender fingers behind his back.
"It's not every day I meet a stranger in my home, but if I do, I'm glad it is beneath the eye of my beloved. Gracious, my good man, you're wounded,"
he said in astonishment. I couldn't return his salutation. It was as if a plum seed hung in my throat. Instead, I stared at my oozing arm, as if seeing it for the first time as well. My ruby essence pouring forth like uncorked wine. The man leaned his bowed neck in for a brief inspection and reeled his right toe away as a drop fell near his foot, splotching instead atop a corner of the stone floor.
"A terrible cut, to be sure, but a mere valley burn on a brute such as yourself. You'll live. I'm sure that woman is fetching you a sling."
Without detaching his sight from my clutched and swollen arm, he raised his hand toward the bench.
"Relax. Come sit."
I acquiesced with a nod and reclined into the petite seat, the wooden boards rocking to one side under my inflated shape. The man ruffled the cloth at his shoulders and shook his head.
"Ah, my goodness, where are my manners?"
He outstretched his bony hand to shake, before eyeing my dismal and still bloodied right hand. His own retreated and instead lay upon my shoulder.
"My name is Sir Robert Rinaldi, gracious husband to our mistress Boudreau."
I returned his proclamation as best I could, though my voice still scratched with the tones of a tawny cat. "Bryce," I croaked. Robert slung one corner of his lip toward his ear in a toothless smile.
"It is good to meet you, Bryce."
He took back his hand and recentered himself in the room. From his pocket he pulled out a thin lace handkerchief, which he released upon the drying blood of the floor and rubbed with his foot.
"It's interesting to find you in this room, Bryce. Of all my guests, there has always been shared sentiment that amongst all the decorations of this manor, from our collection to the vivacious gardens, it is this room, this plain room, that draws them. They are, as I've heard it, shepherded, as if by a ghost. But then, have you?
Upon seeing my paling face, though, he did not give me time to answer. "No, it is not a ghost. Rest easy, my good man." Bizarrely, his big toe pinched up now the bloodied handkerchief by the corner, and, after reeling open one half of the arched window, discarded it upon the patio.
"This may seem odd of a thing to ask, stranger, but have you ever loved?"
he said. His face turned away from me. I heaved my chest back so that my chin raised, eyeing the stillness of his frame. "I have not, sir," he harumphed.
"Let me present for you, then, an explanation of this portrait. I have loved twice, at least by the accounts of my contemporaries, but the truth is, rather, that I have loved only once."
He stood with a practised poise, as if this were a speech he had delivered before.
"The first purported account was at the age of 6, when my mother plucked a few golden cherry tomatoes from the vine and crushed them against the woodside of our poor country cabin."
The man raised his hand, spreading the air with imaginary jam. His eyes were like stones beneath a stream as he laughed.
"She held my finger and traced the shape of a lone daisy I'd found her. I couldn't stop giggling. It was a painting, you see, my first painting. And we bred it with precious life, with juices of the earth and seeds amongst them. You couldn't tell me any different. When a breeze passed our way, I could smell its sweet petals."
I slid up on the rickety wooden bench, watching as the man's chin sunk lower into his chest. At last he turned to me, laying open his palm.
"Art. Crafting with oil and brush, the landscapes, portraits, the birds in the wind. A painter's life. That is what my contemporaries say, even amongst the most avid and accomplished. There is no one who holds its love as I do." "That appears true. It became an obsession for years. I was one of a generation, like a boy born with his sword, scouring the battlefields, finding glory, until the king himself could not ignore my prowess."
He seemed in a trance, listening to his own words. I wondered if he even remembered I was there.
"From my hunger, I could paint for my bread,"
he continued.
"and more from poverty. I could paint myself into nobility. The Academy had seen my talent. Reverend Polanski. It was he who pulled me from the likes of stray dogs and rats. The highest courts marvelled, for all could see what I could do. With a brush, I could shape nature before their eyes. I could bend the wind and draw forth the land like the sap from a maple."
He gestured expansively, a feverish glint in his eye.
"But it could never fill my soul, never heave this weight in my living breath, that even with such a holy gift, I could not give breath. Though I was unrivalled, though this talent hauled me to the highest realms of man, and into the rooms of the exceptional, to this delightful manor, to matrimony even, my creations could not reach their own fingertips past the canvas, and neither could I wrap my arms around what I created. It was death I painted, from the furthest dove to the darkest stone. I could not hear those wings flutter, nor listen to the streams splash against its side."
I stared, uncertain of what I was hearing.
My mother's fist, you see, did not hold the noble paint of cherry tomatoes. It had crushed its life, and so was the touch of my hand. Amongst the greatest mountains, from the height of my pride, my art so plunged into the jaws of those hidden chasms, into the swollen stomach of God, no man alive laughed. But elsewhere I could hear their laughter. For this portrait before you, the Mistress Boudreau, good sir, my magnus opus, is my first and last love. It has taken my poor heart, and as in my brush-strokes she cannot breathe, crushes it." Both his hands reached toward the portrait in imploring silence. I nearly jumped when I realized where he now stood. As he finished speaking, his fingertips rested atop the lips of the woman, embracing the length of her cheek, tracing behind her ear. At that moment, it seemed that her eyes were no longer on me, but on him. Those painted lips. She is the closest I've had to a wife, to sanity in such a cruel existence. And yet we are stuck between two worlds. He appeared weightless as he said this, as if pulled off his feet by her invisible other arm wrapping behind his shoulder. I was for a moment uncertain which of them was real and which was the portrait.
Wait, but Miss Boudreau, I thought... Did I not just meet her?
I had leaned out of my seat, enamoured by how the portrait held such personality in its stillness. But I spun my head and blurted this out, for now I questioned whether the woman was from before, who dabbed my bloody arm, was indeed the ghost he spoke of. At present, all seemed equally possible. The man choked back, holding his forefinger to his chin. No, that is no proper wife. You may see her impersonator, the trollop, moping about the rooms. She is a copy, a poor one at that, a jealous incarnation of my painting in breathing form. Oh, how the forces beyond mock me. So I cannot rid myself of her either, lest I lose this manor and more. Again it seemed like the portrait's eyes turned, but were no longer on the two of us. They glistened in the waning afternoon light, darting above the level of this man named Robert. A spider must have crept up my spine and neck. I felt nothing different. There she was, standing silently at the entrance to the room, beneath the arched enclave, the flesh and blood of Mistress Boudreau, the one from before. I couldn't help the tides swelling in my stomach, the momentary repugnance I felt as I saw the imperfections in her image now. Brutish nose, wiry, tar-like hair, pupils set like beady raisins in dough. The knife she had before, it belonged only in the cavity of her heart, I thought. When I looked at Robert, he shared the same malignant grimace and rested his inanimate eyes back upon her. Her returning scowl could singe the few hairs still standing on his head. I don't believe I was in the room then, rather an onlooker of a layered stone vestibule, like a merchant crossing his horse atop a bridge, only to feel the rattle of the bricks beneath his cart, the rumbling of quarrelling trolls. At last, the woman standing there turned to me. Her hands held the wiry thread, needle, and an elbow full of clean white cloth. "Sir, come with me," she said.